Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the Listening Log Update for February of 2023. I've got 10 albums that I'll be talking about this month. A lot of new things dropped that I was hyped for and was just heavily anticipating. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Timecodes are listed in the description. Let's get into it.
Never said I wasn't petty.
Obviously, I was really excited for this new Paramore album, This Is Why. It was on my excited albums of the year for 2023. The title track was on my singles of the year. I like the other two singles a lot as well. I think The News is a good further expansion of not only the sort of potential lyrical palette for the project, while also further cementing this pivot sonically that the band are doing in this sort of dance punk adjacent post-punk influence style. You know, it makes sense that they're touring with Block Party for this album. I really hope I get to catch their indie show, but we'll see because, hey, it's kind of hard to get music tickets sometimes. As of that, C'est Comme Ça was a nice jam. It was short and sweet. I threw a little postmodern-ish style in there with the sort of nonsensical chaos of the lyrics that sort of is the subject of the song. I don't know. I really like C'est Comme Ça. I think it's a fun song that has a nice punchy drum, drum line with some good guitar work that I kind of wish, and similarly to the last single to drop so far, Running Out of Time, kind of had a bit of a beefier approach to those elements. You know, I like the drums on Running Out of Time, but I still feel like the guitars could use a little more oomph from the production. You know, while they remained a three-piece between albums on After Laughter and this, that sparseness is more felt on this project, I feel. Which I think is fine, by and large. It helps tracks like This Is Why cement this listener in a groove that I think is also done on tracks like Figure 8. But I feel like there are moments where I just kind of want a little more for those hooks. Which is wild to think about because tracks like You First and Figure 8 and even the end of Thick Skull do a good job at letting those guitars sit in a nice pocket to help enhance the sonic palette. You know, if I were to give the album one big knock, it would be that, honestly. But to pivot to more things that I do like about the album, production and consistencies aside, I think the band are writing some fucking great songs on this project. You know, I like the title track a lot. I put it on the singles list. But like I said, I do like The News and C'est Comme Ça a lot. I think that the songwriting on those tracks is still pretty strong. I think the tracks do a good job at strengthening the album's themes of really analyzing oneself. I think Running Out of Time does the same thing really well, which is something that they did really well on After Laughter, showing that they were aging gracefully. Tracks like It and Crave do a good job at talking about aging and that feeling of craving nostalgia the older that you get. I like that even though they don't write much about the world at large, they still find ways to put themselves within that. And tracks like Big Man, Little Dignity, and Thick Skull, which both sort of illustrate that, again, those production inconsistencies. While I like the new accompaniment on Big Man, Little Dignity, I feel like the chorus needs a little something else to help give it that extra oomph. You know what I mean? You know, and again, I like that they sort of bring that in on Figure 8 as well. I feel like it's cool to see the band experiment with sonic accompaniment in a way that's kind of fun, and I like Figure 8. I think that it's a decent jam. You know, it's not as good as some of the other tracks on the album, but it's a pretty fun groove at its core. I almost wish a track like Liar utilized the same thing. You know, that track sort of feels like it's evolving where like Haley experimented with acoustic soft stuff on her second solo outing. You know, it'd be cool to see them incorporate other accompaniment with that sort of atmosphere. I think it'd be a nice sort of way to evolve an already beautiful song. I don't know. This album is really solid. I like a lot of what the band's doing here, and while I don't think I like it as much as After Laughter, I think that it gives it a run for its money in some regards, as far as like transforming their sound without losing sight of where that album took its inspiration from. You know, I don't think it's going to be like near my album of the year this year, but I think that this is a fun early in the year release that definitely sort of, you know, a band similarly to what I've said before, just aging better than their contemporaries. You know, while Fall Out Boy's dropping some pretty nice stuff this year, and MCR probably is, Paramore haven't missed. This is another one that isn't miss in my opinion. It's getting a 7 out of 10. I really appreciate this record a lot, man. It's pretty fucking good.
I hate that she made you wanna cry. Took one shot and such a...
Rebecca Black's debut, Let Her Burn, dropped this past month, and dropped on the anniversary of Friday, because of course, but was an album that left me feeling like a different album did, but unlike the other album, I don't see this becoming one of my albums of the year. And I'm not just saying that because both albums are female synth pop albums with a focus on creating these bold vocals and synth-driven atmospheres. I'm looking at you, Charlie XCX's Crash. They don't feel like the same album, but this leaves me feeling the same way that album initially did to a lesser degree, and that's what makes me feel like I'm just not going to hold on to this as much. It has moments that I do enjoy. I think the opener, Erasure, is incredible at both setting a stage and showing some power. The drop into that chorus is fierce, and I love the way the electronics dance. I think that it's incredible. And I think it leads really well into the kinetically throttling Destroy Me with its drum and bass style backbeat that I think is incredible paired with the bold electronics. You know, I think that it carries the album into a good energy, and I think that it starts the album off on an incredible foot. And honestly, the first leg of the record, through Misery Loves Company and Crumbs' attempts at like a sleek groove and a catchier chorus into a more dense-driven song, I feel like the album's back half is where it sort of starts to lose me. It's not like it's a juxtaposition into like horrible, because I even enjoy Doe-Eyed for its sort of sparse style production, but I feel like that's the first song that I'm like, yeah, this song's okay, but I don't like it as much as everything that's followed. And I kind of feel the same way about the lumbering groove on What Am I Gonna Do With You. It's just a song that I don't really enjoy. But I think a lot of the back half of the album still has some strengths. Like Sick to My Stomach's bass-driven groove that I think finds a pocket and rides it. And I think she finds a real beauty on Cry Hard Enough that finds this ambient soundscape and finds some power within it before putting the listener into a good groove. You know, and I think that on a lot of this record, lyrically, Rebecca Black does show that she can write a song better than anything that the memes may have said back in the day. She's obviously evolved as an artist and become like this actually well-harnessed songwriter in some regards. You know, I enjoy the imagery on Erasure and how she taps into the intensity on Destroy Me in a sort of cathartic way, you know? I think that she's good at writing these hooks. You know, I like the hook on Misery Loves Company. I think that she has a good way that vocally she just dances on the groove. You know, similarly to the intensity lyrically on Erasure and Destroy Me, Crumbs sort of hits a carnal side to it that I think is done really well. I also like that Sick to My Stomach sort of plays into some of the ideas seen in the opener with I'll Let You Play the Devil Tonight, because really, you're a lot more invested in this scenario than I am, man. It's an interesting sort of portrayal of Rebecca's POV as well, and I think that that's one of the more interesting things about it. You know, she talks about that growth on a track like Look at You really, really well. You know, again, songwriting-wise, she hits some good pockets, you know, and I think that, you know, I like that at the core, this album does know how to do good hooks, nice verses that could have a good emotional core. But I think that that scattershot approach with how concise it all feels is where the album sort of falters. You know, while this album does leave an impact in some really good ways, there's not enough that makes me want to come back to it as a whole. And I'm giving it a 6 because it is very, very solid. It's very, very well pulled together in a lot of good ways, but it almost leaves me wanting more in a detractory sense that I didn't feel even initially after the big point of comparison I drew to this at the beginning. This is still a really solid-ass album that balances the lines of noisier ideas in pop, catchier grooves in pop, with some nice ambience and letting the listener in on her POV. It's a pretty solid-ass album, man. And I hope that she continues to grow and experiment. You know, I thought that the Friday remix was fun. A fun sort of deconstruction on the meme. But I like that this strips that away in the vein of something more, and I hope that she springs off of this with more. In Flames as a band should live in a place foregone to me in the inner mechanisms of my mind. A place that I should go for nostalgia. Yet every time they drop something, I'm there, and I'm seeing what they got going on. Because it's weird. I made this comparison in my last review of this band when I reviewed their last album, where I thought it was a solid, if not kind of meddling release from a band far past their prime. Honestly, feels more worth it than Eye of the Mask, in my opinion, in some regards. Take that, cynical side of me. You know, while I wish there were more in the vein of tracks like State of Slow Decay or The Great Deceiver, or I'll even take more like Meet Your Maker, because while that sounds like a Come Clarity-ass track by In Flames, I mean, even if it is idiosyncratic as fuck, I'll take those over the heavy moments like In the Dark or Cynosure. You know, while I think that Bleeding Out, you know, Tapestry is a little more on the interesting side, that track more leans heavier into the In Flames as the incubus of modern metal ass mood that they channel. I even appreciate the 2-part track on here. It's not, like, great, but it's okay. I know I sound like somebody who's like in a marriage, like, 40 years in, who's like not been happy for like 25 years, and they're like trying the best to make their case as to like why they've stuck around for these obtuse large ass numbers. There's components of this that give me more of what I always say I look for in an In Flames album. Just like appearing into like an adaptation on like where they've been, man. You know, like I don't love this thing. It's not, like, stupendous, and, like, I'll admit, it's a bit fucking long. But it's alright. It's got some jams, man. Again, Meet Your Maker, if you're wanting, like, the most watered-down version of Come Clarity, there you go. This album's getting a 5, the more I think about it. Like, it's not horrible, but it's definitely, like, the same as their last album.
Run for them life. When I step into the jungle, say they wanna group up. They better move.
Skrillex dropped 2 albums this month, which are his first albums in a long time. And I'm going to talk about them both, but I'm going to start with A Quest for Fire, because that's what I list spun first. And I like A Quest for Fire. Like many people, I would say I like it more than Don't Get Too Close, but I enjoy the sounds on this a lot. So I'll be honest, I did not keep up with Skrillex post-Bangarang, while I did put Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites in my top 100 of the decade because, I mean, you know, I had to. And I did hear the Justin Bieber single. That was really where Skrillex fell off for me, was Bangarang. I just stopped. I didn't even listen to Recess, to be honest. I figured I should see what Skrillex is up to now, see where he really evolved his sound to, because I didn't expect dubstep on this new album. You know, I expected sort of an evolution electronically. You know, he was doing this sort of image pivot, so obviously I figured a sonic pivot would follow. But I like where he took his sound in a lot of aspects on A Quest for Fire. You know, I think it's insane that not only did he give us nostalgia in the form of that Cup Kid sample, which I hope she gets royalties every time he samples her, because that's insane that in 2023 I got to hear, oh my god, with a new Skrillex drop. But then also, he did a fucking Zelda Navi drop in Tears, which that song is pretty good. I don't think it's as good as like the Missy Elliott collab on Ratata, not only flipping the line from Work It with the rat-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, flipping that into a sample and having her do a couple verses is a pretty cool collab. And I like the Fortec collab on Butterflies. I think that's a pretty good song that sort of pivots in a different way. But I enjoy a lot of this. I love Rumble. You know, it evokes like Rough in the Jungle vibes by The Prodigy. I also like the track with Sway Lee, Too Bizarre. It kind of feels like Skrillex's version of a Pink Panther song, which is kind of wild with Don't Get Close to Me. I think putting Dylan Brady and Noisia on a song alone is kind of insane. The bass on that song, I can't even imagine how deep it actually goes. Shit sounds like a sledgehammer every time I listen to it, in the best way possible. And I think it's interesting that he threw an interview with Pete Wentz on here, I don't know, I like this album a decent amount. I think that it's got a lot of really good songs. There's some that I like more than others. You know, I think that Still Here is a really cool closer. While I like what Xena does with its energy, I think that it kind of rejuvenates me after Inhale Exhale, which I would say is a moment where the album sort of loses me personally. I also feel the same way about Good Space. I just don't think it's as good as Too Bizarre for the auto-tune driven songs or Still Here. But as an album, this is honestly pretty solid. I'm giving it like a 7. Like, it's got moments that lose me, but by and large, this album fucking rocks, dude. Like, I really appreciate where Skrillex took his sound. Now, like I said in the Quest for Fire review, I don't like Don't Get Too Close as much as a Quest for Fire. Do I hate it, though? Not entirely. I think its weaker components are just collaborations that I don't think work as well as the ones on A Quest for Fire. In fact, it surprises me in some ways, because I'm not the biggest Trippie Redd guy, but Way Back kind of knocks, and it's a collaboration that, yeah, it kind of makes me want to see Skrillex and Pink Panthers just work on a track together. I think Trippie Redd kind of ties it together pretty nicely, and I think that it goes into a really decent trunk knocker in Selecta, even if kind of not as interesting as stuff from A Quest for Fire. Still is alright. And I think that sort of not as interesting repetitiveness of Selecta leads into some of the other collaborations I don't enjoy, like Bad For Me with Chief Keef and Corbin, or Don't Go with Justin Bieber and Don Oliver, which feels like it's trying to, like, tap into some of the ideas from Skrillex and Bieber's last collaboration. It's just a beat that I don't think is as interesting as some of the other moments on here that I enjoy more. I also think that the collaboration with Sway Lee also isn't that bad. That in tandem with the collaboration on A Quest for Fire, I'd like to see the two of them work together again. This album's weak points are just moments where Skrillex decides to collaborate with artists that, whether because they're popping off or to sort of call back to past collaborations, they just fall apart in my opinion, leading to a much more average feeling experience as a whole. I'd give this album like a 5. It's not like awful, but it's definitely not anything that wowed me to the same degree that A Quest for Fire did. What can I do? Oh, you alright? There's so many shadows that I can't. So if there's one album that I've honestly been the most excited for to listen to this month, it's the new Algiers. You guys know Algiers are like one of my favorite bands in recent years. I think that they really haven't missed, even if I think that their last album, There Is No Year, is still their weakest effort. It's a cool idea built around a decent project. However, the singles leading up to this new album, they did a hell of a live show when I saw them at Riot Fest, and I've been excited for this new album. Irreversible Damage was on my Songs of the Year, and while a couple of the new singles showed off a further shift in sound with elements that felt very Algiers, I had this feeling that they were going to just do something special with this project. And on Shook, in my opinion, they really do. There's a lot going on this project. It is a dense album. There's just a lot to sit with in terms of world building, songwriting, song style, and structure. And on Shook, they find ways to push new personal horizons as a band while retaining all of the components from their last 3 albums that made them so enthralling to begin with. One of the things I really appreciate, honestly, is just how nice some of this sounds. You know, for a band that started with this raw feel, but with bold ideas, I like seeing this band get to not only just sonically, but lyrically, really challenge a listener. You know, one of the things I was most disappointed about with There Is No Year is the lack of sonic ideas in the vein that, like, they had tapped in before, which was all the more confusing given the single Can the Sub Bass Speak. It was a dense, poetic, well-constructed song that was one of my songs of the year that it came out. And what I like is that even parts of this album seemingly tap more into the energy of that and help it tie into the Algiers discography as a whole sonically. Tracks like 73% blend it with the same sonic ideas that throttled their debut on tracks that I love, like Black Eunuch, while Out of Style Tragedy more leans into the more experimental edge that that single had with its dense, layered vocals. While frontman Franklin James Fisher does something that he does on tracks like 73% and on the record by and large, and that's paint a picture in a very well-articulated sense from a well-illustrated POV. I think that parts of this record remind me of elements of artists like Saul Williams that I really enjoy, and I feel like if Saul Williams were writing stuff like his old stuff, it would sound like this album. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. I appreciate the hell out of what these guys are doing lyrically. I think that there is a good sense of theming in a lot of this. You know, not only just in the world building lyrically, and obviously in some of the more interlude style tracks. Tracks like Comment Number 2 and All You See Is, which do a good job at painting, like, aspects of white perspective on black culture, or you know, a POV within that of the black struggle as, you know, downplaying it while also talking about the hypocrisy of also expecting more because of that on All You See Is. You know, the opener and As It Resounds with Big Rube do a good job at, like, solidifying those themes and the use of the word shook within the album's themes as well. It's really strong. The songwriting on this album and the pacing of it through that is just fucking aces. You know, it does a lot to service the commentary that the band is writing about, and I think that as an album experience, this is an incredible one. You know, not just in songwriting and unifying in thematics, but in pacing and in songs in general. You know, opening with a hook-driven track like Everybody Shatter that has this, again, pivot in sound for the band that leans a little more on a funk-leaning groove, I think is impeccably done. And again, helps to branch Algiers out into scenes that fit their overall style in ways that I really enjoy. Before going into one of the lead singles, and again, it fits nicely as an early album banger to really throw the listener into a little more of an Algiers-style sonic palette. Again, it's sort of an adaptation, but I think it's one that that blends the band's ideas very, very well. And again, hearing them with that production style works masterfully. I also really enjoy that throughout the first half, it does lead on, I don't want to say leaner songs, just songs that kind of have either an abstract idea or a tighter, unified songwriting that keeps the thematics in check, while the back half does have even more abstract idea that really either pay off nice moments from the debut expanded, like Green Iris, which I really appreciated. You know, you guys know I love Algiers' debut. It was my album of the year that it came out, and I would still stand by that. It is easily the best thing to come out of 2015, a year stacked with incredible music. But I think that what they did on tracks like Remains gets a nice, just glossy approach that I think the band harnesses really well. I love that song. I love the progression of it. It's like a 6-minute jam, and I think that it's the band not only writing this beautiful tune, but working with these many musicians and making this well-done piece. Before going into an even more abstract, poetic interlude that lyrically even goes into deeper ideas that I think is just well done. I just think that this project as a whole is Algiers getting to really spread their wings. You know, as a fan of ambitious, dense albums, I think that Shook is a written one. Sonically, the band are doing some really captivating things, and I think that while it is a dense listen, it is one that is rewarding every time I revisit it, and it's one that I'm excited to spin throughout the year. It's one that I'll be looking forward to add to the collection. You know, I really appreciate this album. I hope to catch them live, to hear some of these jams live. And if you have the chance to, I highly suggest seeing them live. And it's funny, the more that I sit with this record, the more that it just hits for me, man. Like, this is easily on par with, if not a little bit better than, The Underside of Power. I still think I like their debut more, but I'm going to give this a parallel score. I'm going to give this a 10 as well. I really like Shook. I think it's easily the strongest record I've heard so far this year, and it's incredible. Gorillaz, I feel like, need little to no introduction on this channel. You guys maybe know, if you're a follower of mine, that they're one of my favorite bands. I enjoy their catalog by and large, and I was excited for Cracker Island. I put the title track on my singles of the last year, similarly to the Paramore album. And while I didn't like the Tame Impala collaboration quite as much, I feel like it was a kneecapping of Booty Brown in a way I was not expecting, given their past collaborations together. But looking at the track listing got me excited to see them work with other artists like Stevie Nicks and Beck again. And I think that, again, their collaboration with Adele Omateo is one of their best songs now. And while I think it does an admirable job at trying to tie to the thematics from the title track of cults from the POV of both sides in some instances, it feels like, it doesn't hit the same strides that I was hoping it would, especially given the kinetic energy and the song crafting on Song Machine, the grooves that this album tries to throttle into. Like on the title track, you know, while I thought the groove on New Gold was, again, sort of underutilized, I think that on Oil, it's handled very well, and I think that their collaboration with Stevie Nicks is pretty great. I even like the Tired Influencer at sort of creating this slow groove to sort of illustrate somebody through the lens of, like, this sort of thing, you know what I mean? And Tarantula, I think, is a fucking incredible moment, in my opinion. As a whole, this album feels like it's trying to just harness a groove. It's, you know, similarly to Myself, sitting in a funky realm. And while I think it handles the groove admirably, there's just some moments that I don't like as much as others. You know, this album is pretty alright, but I would honestly say, following up an album like Song Machine, it's a little disappointing. You know, how are you gonna tease a funky-styled album and have an artist like Thundercat in your track listing and give Beck the ballad, man? If you're gonna use Beck, use him well. At least Gaga knew to put him on the song about masturbation. And while I wouldn't say I'm the biggest Bad Bunny fan, I just don't listen to a whole lot of reggaeton, the Gorillaz' approach to it, it's alright, I guess, but it's not like my favorite song they've done. They've done better songs utilizing that idea. And it would have been cool to see them sort of create something else out of a collaboration with Bad Bunny, in my opinion. And it's wild. They did the same thing with Song Machine, but they did a deluxe edition where they dropped more songs of collaborations that you would sort of kind of see from them. You know, stuff like a project with Del the Funky Homo Sapien and De La Soul that are pretty interesting in their own regards. You know, tracks like Captain Chicken with Del the Funky Homo Sapien and Crocodillas with De La Soul just kind of suit the Gorillaz camp already, so why weren't they just put on the album proper? You know, yeah, Captain Chicken sounds like a weird-ass fucking song, but on an album like this, and focusing on the absurdity that the influencer can become sometimes, is kind of interesting, you know? And, again, sort of throwing in the themes that the album is toying with. It would have been an interesting deviation, but hey, it would have been a cool collaboration to see on the album proper. I don't know. This is an album begging to be redacted. It's not bad, but it's certainly, again, a disappointment. I'm giving it like a 7. I really wanted more from this, but it's not like awful. It just has components that they end up fixing in some regard by just adding more songs that I think kind of change the pace a little bit, you know what I mean? While this album tries to dazzle and keep a listener in a groove, whether slow or, you know, speedy, it still kind of sits in a groove. You know, it gets comfortable with itself in a way that I feel like Song Machine and Humans, and a lot of Gorillaz albums just don't do, that I feel like a Redacted with the deluxe tracks, which will be happening at some point, I feel like would kind of help the album in some regards. Watsky's back with his third entry in a trilogy that he's been trying to finish for a while now. A pandemic kind of got in the middle of this trilogy, and you can feel some of that in the presentation of Intention. It feels like a sequel that should have been made years ago, but is only finally seeing the light of day. And that's not to knock it so intensely, because for all the things I like on the other two parts of that, I think do get to shine on Intention. And I like that he calls attention to that in some regard, like on the opener, The Plan is a Mess, where he kind of talks about how things may have meant to be one thing, but they were immediately shifted into a different realm. And that energy of haphazardness sort of feels like it's played up in aspects of the record, but there's this overall sense of age to this that Watsky feels like he's sort of been building to, especially if you follow his social media presence. You know, while tracks like Paper Nihilist have this bleaker side and outlook at the world and sort of finding your place in it, I like that he also has tracks like Rollin' and Aw Shit to sort of either be reflective in an older sense or spice things up in a way that taps into that nihilism in a less bleak sense. Or on The Truth, which sort of deconstructs it in a, again, bitter sense, but one that comes with a dose of age that I feel like Watsky would speak from, given his time as a more poet-leaning writer than as a rapper-ass rapper. And he has tracks where he gets to be a rapper-ass rapper, like on some of the singles like Rollin' and Aw Shit and What's the Move, where he gets a little braggadocious. He has some fun collaborations in there as well. And while I like that a lot of this album tries to give a nice, well-rounded set of ideas, they don't feel like they tie into any grand theatrics that a three-piece trilogy would necessarily be, but maybe that's the point. I still like a lot of this. I think that the production's really solid. You know, I think the beat on Mile Away matches a smoothness that track is trying to tap into that lends to collaboration like Rachel Ziegler sticking the landing. I feel like he does a good job, similarly to records like Cardboard Castles and parts of the trilogy, showing a nice evolution of his style and sound. Like, Watsky's been playing up this puzzle on his social media, and I know that there's, like, thematics in all three. I mean, the album cover, as much as I don't like it, it does lean heavy into stuff that has been, like, addressed in the trilogy, or, like, topics and the sort. I don't know. Like, I think it's partially because of the length as well. It's a shorter record, and it left me wanting a bit more with this, you know? Like, I enjoy this catharsis on parts of the record, and I feel like as far as an ending piece of a trilogy goes, that kind of makes sense. But it, like, you guys already know I was gonna redact this just for fun, and it's made that process all the more interesting for me. Like, it's not bad, I just kind of wanted more from it. And what I like about this is that, similarly to the lyric sheet, it shows his growth as an artist in a natural way. Even if I don't necessarily love all the ideas here, I think that it's a nice, concise record that, similarly to the other two pieces of this, don't necessarily overstay their welcome or provide anything that's necessarily outright awful. It's just a decent experience across the board. I gave Complaint a 6. I'd probably give this a 6 too. I kind of wish there was a little more to the plate, but I like what's here well enough.
Here's a rider, side I like and find her, no sympathy.
It's kind of shocking I didn't listen to Caroline Polachek's debut solo album Pang when it came out, because I got into Chairlift around the time they were calling it quits, and I did like them, and I love her voice, and I do like that album. I've listened to it after the fact, but I wanted to get in at near ground level with her sophomore outing, Desire, I Want to Turn Into You, an album that sees her creating this world all her own. You know, she opens it with the track Welcome to My Island, which feels like a stage-setting piece that shows the core of this album at its whole. You're going to have these great grooves with some synth and electro-driven sounds, and Caroline's voice dancing around it all. You know, I love Pretty Impossible, I Believe, Fly to You is a really good collaboration, and I love the dance kineticism of that track. And I also like the two closers, Smoke and Billions, a lot for achieving a similar stride. I also enjoy that she has some banger side in there, like on Bunny as a Rider. I love the vocal lines on that. I think it sounds good amidst the groove on that track. I love the flamenco tinge Sunset. I think she has a really good hook on that song that has this romantic edge that I feel like would have led into Crude Drawing of an Angel there, but that is one of the tracks where I kind of, given the lyric sheet, would have loved to have seen more of what the album has. And that's not to say the softer or less electro-infused or kinetic moments are all bad. You know, I like Blood and Butter a decent amount, and I think Butterfly Net should have honestly been the closer. There's this sweeping grandness to it that feels like it's rounding things out to a really good resolve. But then we get two more tracks that are solid, but definitely feel misplaced. And especially given Butterfly Net comes after Hope Drunk Everlasting, it feels like this moment where the album kind of sits in this lull in a way that isn't necessarily bad, because I do like both of those songs. But it's a point that sort of accents one of my bigger issues with the album, in that some of the pacing feels a little mismanaged. But it's hard to knock the album so intensely on that when the songs are just that good. I really enjoy a lot of this. And if you've seen some of the playlists I've been talking about making, you can see I've been sort of already in this electro dance driven inspired realm on my own. So to see Caroline sort of tap into that and do it really well just feels really good to me listening to it, given again this is sort of a vibe I've been sort of diving into on my own anyway. And honestly, I enjoy a lot of what this album has to bring into the table as far as well-produced pop with a singer that knows how to use her voice very well to hit a good emotional resonance with the listener. You know, I think this is a strong outing, and I think that it's another really good early in the year smash that I think shouldn't be slept on. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. It's a really strong album that I think is very much worth your time.
Living life like a renegade. Most people just living their life trying to get paid. Good fella wanna get made, trying to get that paper.
So the last album I checked out was the newest one by Logic, College Park. His first album as an independent artist post his Def Jam contract ending. You guys know, I thought his last project, Vinyl Days, was easily one of his strongest. While it was a project I feel like was similarly to other Logic projects in the same breath, sort of bloated with a needless amount of skits, it all seemed to service the overall homages that Logic was trying to pay tribute to on the project as a whole from a production standpoint, slash acting as a send-off to a time in Logic's life as an artist that felt very huge for him. And College Park sees him trying to carry the energy of that and the energy that his sort of sound is sort of transformed into in the realms of boom bap and the flavors of boom bap that he's played with, while also trying to look back in a way that like goes way back. College Park is meant to be an homage to Logic's early days, and you get that in a lot of the skits and collaborations and stuff, and I feel like those moments, similarly to Final Days, are meant to enhance avenues that Logic's trying to explore on College Park, but I feel like the album sort of falls in trying to unify those ideas and those tributes with Logic's current POV in 2023. You know, while there's great tracks on both sides of that coin, there's this good sort of follow-through on some moments in earlier Logic's career where he focused on stuff like mental health, like on Red Pill 7 and Self-Medication, where he talks about his bouts with therapy and what that's brought him and how music is sort of his vice and his form of self-medication. I don't like how on Red Pill 7 he really goes in on therapy in like I feel like a detractory sense. I feel like just boiling it down to the medicine. Like, if the medicine didn't work for you, that's understandable. That happens through the process, but like, I don't know. It wasn't my vibe. And then the rest of the track kind of felt like it was leaning into the Confessions of a Dangerous Mind album, and I don't really like that record by Logic, which sucks because that beat rocks. I love the beat of that song. I think the Aphex Twin sample is choice. I think that if he was doing Logic-flavored Aphex Twin sample, that may or may not have been leaning into a TikTok trend where the Limp Bizkit mashup with that Aphex Twin track became like a thing, and then it became a fart joke, which is hilarious. But tangent aside, I really like the beat of that song, and I hate the POV and the writing on it. Self-medication's fine. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I don't really go in on the Seth MacFarlane feature outside of mentioning that it's a meme on TikTok, but it's not my bag. I mean, it's fine on that track, but, like, I don't really like Seth MacFarlane's music. I think it's Muzaki, which is, you know, it's a vibe. I don't know. There's other artists that I like more than him that do it, personally. Redman's great on that song, though. And while that seems to be the purpose of the project, especially with the intro of Cruising Through the Universe, which is a nice RZA track, and it sort of plants some Wu-Tang imagery in there that gets paid off on Shimmy, which is a great collaboration with Joey Badass. I feel like Logic showing both sides of the coin doesn't make for a fruitful experience to me. Tracks like Gaithersburg Freestyle and the track that is the coordinates to College Park that seemingly try to pay homage to an era of Logic's life that is long gone at this point, and I feel like does a better job at paying tribute to pre-Under Pressure Logic better than No Pressure did at paying tribute to Under Pressure Logic, which was the era that I got into Logic in, which could be a reason why I like that aspect of this record. I do think that there are maybe one too many skits that go on for a bit too long. I do think, or that don't go anywhere, I do think that, like, Village Slum into High Life kind of makes sense, you know, which goes into the Coordinates song, I think, pretty well. I don't know. Like, there's a stretch of the record where I feel like Logic's trying to tell a story, and you're like, yeah, at least if you like that era, you're like, yeah, I'm okay. That's chill, I guess. And, like, for what he's trying to do, I can see what he's trying to do. Again, I agree. Some of it goes on for a bit too long. But I digress. Both worlds just feel so far apart that it creates this weird juxtaposition, which would be fine if the album wasn't so heavy with these skits that are laced throughout the tracks that help propel the narrative of paying homage to Logic's early days. I also like that gets sort of rounded out even more on Village Slum, where he talks about his bouts with alcoholism. It also just makes, like, the 1-2 punch of Lightsabers and Clone Wars feel kind of lost in the fray. They're solid enough tracks, same with Playwright, but they don't feel like they add as much to the conversation as the tracks that I do enjoy. And there's a handful of tracks on here that I just feel like don't really add much to the overall track listing as a whole. Like tracks like Wake Up and Inspio. You know, while I enjoy some of the other collaborations like Ayo and Paradise 2, I don't think they're as strong as like Shimmy or the stuff with his buddies. And I think the production palette on here overall is pretty solid, if not a bit bland throughout pockets of it. I do like some of the ideas on here. Like, I love the sample flipping on Village Slum. I love the Aphex Twin sample on Red Pill 7, even if some of the bars on there get a little questionable at times. And while I think the sentiment on a track like Clone Wars 3 isn't all that bad, I just feel like Logic doesn't add much to the conversation around the subject of that particular song. It's like the most fine I felt walking away from a Logic project in a minute, because with Logic projects, I'm usually either relatively into a majority of it and think that it's a solid experience, or I think that it's outright garbage, or I think that it's a pretty disappointing release with not much to bring to the table. And while I feel like this treads the same waters of where I feel like Logic had been on like Young Sinatra 4 when it came to like, when it comes to talking about his own perspective, sometimes it feels like he's sort of run out of stuff to talk about. The moments where he does feel like he has something to say, or he has an earnest tribute to his area, he pulls it off pretty gracefully. I think this album's really solid. I give it a 6. It's not awful. I've enjoyed a majority of it. I just kind of wish Some tracks were left at the wayside, some of the collaborations may have been reined in a little better, and he sort of found a way to ride the balance of the narrative / thematics he was wanting to talk about, while finding ways to pay tribute to that in a modern reflective sense, you know what I mean? And that's my listening log update for the month. Did you like what I listened to? Did you not? Let me know your thoughts on the albums in the comments down below, along with anything you'd like for me to potentially check out on this segment. If you did like this, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have a good day's lives and situations, and I'll see you another day.